All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and continue with the discussion on motivation and control, locus of control, and all that. I think one of the things I ended with yesterday is, we were talking about the idea of locus of control, internal versus external. And this is an interesting and probably a true little drawing on the difference between the two. With an internal locus of control, people will say things like, I make things happen. Look what I can do. I can determine my future. You make things happen. And I think I explained that a little bit yesterday. With an external locus of control, why bother? Because it doesn't matter. There's nothing I can do about my future. It's all out of my hands. Why does everything happen to me? Generally, that's an external locus of control. Things happen to you. Research says that those with an internal locus of control tend to be happier, less depressed, and less stressed. I know some of you have mentioned you battle with depression sometimes. My thought would be take a look at your locus of control. Do you feel things happen to you, or do you feel that you have the power to change things, that you make things happen versus things happen to you? And that could be a clue. And as we get into this, we're going to talk a little more about how we can change our locus of control from internal to external. And you can do here you can do a little self-evaluation. Which side do you tend to relate to, internal or external? So, all right. So moving on, we've talked about a couple different types of theories, instinct theory and drive reduction theory. We're going to move on to arousal theory. And the arousal theory suggests of motivation that we seek optimum level of excitement or arousal. High optimum level of arousal equals high excitement behaviors. People who do base jumping, people who do rock climbing, I guess what you would call the X sports or the extreme sports. Those people kind of fall into this category, this theory. High mountain skiing, things like that, surfing. All those types of people who participate in that generally are seeking a high level of arousal. People who jump out of airplanes, stuff like that. And generally what happens is that when placed in those situations or in situations where there is a high level of excitement, they tend to perform problem-solving tasks better than those who are generally not. So again, that's arousal theory. Yerkes-Dodson law, which was developed in 1908, says that performance increases with physiological or mental arousal, but only up to a point. And so that's kind of important to know. There is a threshold in which if you're any more aroused, you will not perform as well. You can see this. I see this a lot as a coach. You'll have times when teams are so amped up, so excited, so ready, so just on edge that they actually perform poorly. So that's kind of a two-edged sword. You have to have, as a former athlete myself, I know you've got to have a certain amount of emotion. You've got to have a certain amount of pump, I guess you could say, to really perform at your best. If you have too little, you're just not going to have that emotional edge. And if you have too much, that can also impact negatively your performance. You think too much, you'll overreact, and your performance will be lacking. So the Yerkes-Dodson law is kind of something to remember, especially as it relates to the arousal theory. The other thing it mentions is that different tasks require different levels of arousal for optimal performance. So Think about a baseball game. The difference between baseball and football. The baseball is generally, as a rule, is a bit more relaxed, a bit more laid back. If you are super amped, super high strung, super ready to go, you'll overswing, you'll overthrow. Whereas if you are playing football, the amount of arousal is different there. You want to be super high strung. You want to hit harder. You want to throw farther. You want to have the super concentration for receiving. You want to be super on top of your game with knowing where the plays are going. So it is important to remember that different tasks require different levels of arousal for optimal performance. You're still going to perform. You just may perform negatively, or you may perform on point. And here is that as a graph. This is the quality of your performance. The lower down is poor performance, and then the higher you get. And then this axis is your emotional arousal. So here, if you got low arousal, generally you'll have poor performance. As you increase your arousal, you'll notice your performance level increases to a certain point. All right, and then when you're super highly aroused, or high over aroused, then your performance then suffers again. So that's basically what I've just been saying, just in a graph form. It says a degree of psychological arousal, stress, anxiety, etc. can actually improve performance only to a point. Too much or too little arousal will decrease performance. It's essentially what I just said. So again, intrinsic versus extrinsic. Extrinsic, the desire to perform a behavior because of the promise of a reward or a threat of punishment. Grades, money. This is not doing things because you like doing things. This is doing things because you get something for them. A job. We're going to spend some time looking at some different studies that really sort of go against our notions on motivation and why we go to work, why we go to school, and all that stuff, which I think you'll find interesting. But an extrinsic motivator, and we mentioned this a little bit today, is basically just our ability, or why we do our behaviors, usually because of the promise of reward or punishment. Whereas intrinsic, you do things for its own, because you enjoy doing them, for the internal reward, because you feel good. An example, and may not be a good example, but hunting and fishing for me. I know I'm not a top-notch hunter. I know I'm not some big super fisherman. All right, but I like doing things. I like doing it. I like I like killing and butchering and packing the deer. Not necessarily because I get money for it or because I'm going to eat it, as much as I do just the internal enjoyment of being in the woods, of going through the process. I personally really enjoy learning. I've mentioned before thinking about getting my EDD at some point. Part of that is to make myself a bit more, I don't know what the word is, marketable. But the other side of that is I like being in class. I like discussing different ideas. I like discussing different theories, and I like discussing their impact on individual student achievement. That's just something I enjoy doing. I would do that without getting paid. So that is another sort of an intrinsic motivation. So what I want you to do for pause the video and just maybe think or jot down some things that you internally motivate you to do what you do, to perform any sort of behavior. Just what are some things you do just for their own sake of doing? And take some time to just think about that. So, which is better? What kind of motivation is better? Generally, intrinsic motivation has the edge. Now, let's think about this. If intrinsic has the edge, then why is it that everything we do in society generally is based around extrinsic? Paychecks, grades. Extrinsic still has value, and more often than not, the two work together, and that's kind of the hope, is that you'll find the two when they do work together. What are some problems with extrinsic motivation? We're going to talk a bit more about this in some readings that we do and some videos and things like that. In fact, I may post one. If we don't have school tomorrow, I want to post a YouTube video I want you all to watch. But I think we're going to be in school. Anyways, what are some problems? Be thinking about jot down some problems with external or extrinsic motivations. Behaviors generally maintained by extrinsic motivators don't last once the motivation is gone. I think about my dog, my hunting dog. When we go bird hunting, he is supposed to go out and sniff birds and get them up and flush them. He's a flushing dog to shoot. Well, one of the behaviors I've had to train him is to stay close. Because if you get too far out, he's flushing birds out of gun range. And so the idea is you got to keep him close so that he doesn't flush birds out of range. Everything that he flushes is in range. Well, one of his behaviors, one of the modifiers, one of the things I do, the motivators I use to keep him close is a shock collar. Now, usually it's just the threat of the shock collar. I've gotten to the point where I don't even have to use it. I can yell too far, and he kind of turns and comes back. But there are times when I do have to remind him of what his responsibilities are. I made the mistake of not charging it one time. And we went out, and he realized it wasn't on him, and he had no motivation to stay close. His internal motivation was to get as many birds up in the air as possible. He wasn't thinking about, well, it's too far away. He's wanting to chase birds. That's just what he does. So that's an example of where an extrinsic motivation can be an issue because, think about class. If I stopped giving grades, if I stopped doing any of that, how many of you all would still watch the videos? How many of you all would still do the paperwork? How many of you all would still study? I'd say some of you do have some internal, and this is probably a bad class to ask this with because taking an AP class in and of itself, most of you probably have an intrinsic motivator or an internal motivator. But think about maybe students and class as a whole. If we just stopped giving grades, how many people would do homework? How many people would stay for tests? So we know there's a value in it, right? We know that watching these videos sort of gets your brain moving. It sort of gets you working on remembering and learning things. The worksheets I periodically hand out, they sort of reiterate that stuff, the discussions we have in class, all that. I forgot where I was going with that point. But anyways, once those motivators are removed, the behaviors generally stop when it comes to extrinsic motivators. Will students' grades go down if parents stop giving them money for A's and B's? Evidence suggests removal of extrinsic motivators result in lower behavior levels. Then you've also got the over-justification effect. If we give extrinsic rewards for things someone already loves to do, the intrinsic motivation may be replaced by the extrinsic motivation. And this is something that's we're going to talk at length about. I think I'm going to stop here I think we're going to stop here to before we move on, because we're going to talk about this idea a little bit more. Essentially, think about athletes. You see this with contract discussions. Kids play sports. I hope kids play sports because they enjoy it. I hope my softball girls enjoy playing softball because they love playing softball. I hope they like being around me, but that's not as important to me as them enjoying the game. So kids start playing softball or baseball or basketball or whatever, football, because they enjoy it. Well, what happens is when these amateur athletes play ball because they enjoy it, then college comes again. Now you're going to play ball. Why are you playing ball? So that you can get college paid for. That extrinsic motivation of paying for college is now replacing the intrinsic motivator. And then after that, well, I'm going to go play professionally. Now you got money. All right, that internal motivator of money, the external motivator of money is now replacing the internal motivation of enjoying the game. And so where you start seeing athletes, you hear a lot of old timers talk about how athletes nowadays are babies. If they don't get their money, they're not going to play. Well, I think that speaks more to motivations. And we can discuss more about this in class, but because I plan on it, we're going to have a pretty good discussion on this. And I don't know if you can tell, but justification is misspelled. I just noticed that. But anyways, hope you all have a good day. Hope you all are staying warm. If we do not have school tomorrow, be on the lookout for a video. I will post hopefully sometime around noon. It'll be, I think it's a TED Talk video that we're going to discuss, that I want you to see. So anyways, but I think we'll be here. I think we'll just be on a 2-hour delay. But again, hope you all have a good day and stay warm. Peace out.